and welcome to Books That Made Britain, books that capture the essence of the places where we live. I'm here in glorious D.H. Lawrence country and my home county, Nottinghamshire. I've chosen 3 excellent books. Each of these authors could be described as a working class rebel, furthermore, as a master storyteller. Here's what's coming up. A book that caused a sensation.
Don't let the get you down.
And put the back streets of Nottingham on the map. A funny, subversive teenage diary tapped out on an old typewriter.
Neither sooner I thought it might be big, but it just exploded.
It became an international multi-million bestseller. And a revolutionary story of life in the pits.
It depicts that industrial, close-knit community.
Now rated as one of the best novels of all time. Before the end of the show, I have the impossible task of having to pick a favourite from those 3. But we begin here in Nottingham with a novel that caused quite a stir when it was first published in 1958. Saturday Night and Sunday Morning by Alan Sillitoe.
I'm me, and nobody else. And whatever people think I am or say I am, that's what I'm not. Because they don't know a bloody thing about me.
It's the story of rebellious factory worker Arthur Seaton. A drinker, a fighter and a lover, determined to win at whatever cost. Here, fighting the corner for Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, is local writer Nikki Monaghan.
Well, for me, when I opened that book and read it for the first time when I was about 15, it was the first time that I'd seen something in a book that I really, really recognised. And so it was like a bit of a revolutionary moment because I thought, actually, I can be a writer. I think, you know, Arthur Seaton, his kind of refusal to be defined, so he's a bit rebellious, but if you ever called him a rebel, he would say, no, it's not that, you don't know who I am. And I think that that's really typical of a kind of Nottingham mentality.
Like Arthur, Alan Sillitoe, his creator, never liked being labelled.
Magic moments.
He'd say, I'm no Arthur Seaton, but he certainly knew plenty of them.
Magic moments.
Raised in Radford, a close-knit working-class community in Nottingham, he simply called himself an observer.
It was my home ground, which surrounded me with an intensity and familiarity that no other place has been able to give.
On leaving school, he began working at Rally Bikes.
It was with a sense of wonder and adventure that I went to work in a factory at 14. I didn't particularly want to go, but I was resigned to it.
The shop floor spoke, and the young Alan listened.
Well, I should say repetition work without good mates around you could be very, very boring.
Well, actually rolling off fast bars, but one time I used to get satisfaction out of it, but now I've got past that now. It just comes a matter of routine now.
Best part of the week? Oh, Friday mostly.
The idea of going to work in a factory held no fears for me, and being given my own lathe to work at 17 was a big step up.
As on the playground, and now in the factory, I daydreamed and fixed the faces, habits and possible histories of the people around me in my mind, almost without realising it, and certainly not knowing the use I would one day put it to.
It would lead to the creation of a book that caused a sensation and a character called Arthur Seaton.
Factories sweat you to death. Labour exchanges talk you to death. Insurance and income tax officers milk money from your wage packets and rob you to death. And if you're still left with a tiny bit of life in your guts after all this boggering about, the army calls you up and you get shot to death.
Saturday Night and Sunday Morning was revolutionary. The stories of everyday people and their lives had never been told before with such gritty realism.
He wrote very honestly. It wasn't confected, it was absolutely from the heart. And I think when we look back over 20, 30, 40, 50 years, this is one of the peaks. This is one of the great British novels that I think obviously came at exactly the right time, connected with people deeply, and actually made a difference.
Much of the city David's father knew and captured on the page has disappeared. But the memories of factory workers who knew David's father and lived in the real world of Saturday night and Sunday morning remain as fresh as ever.
Work was hard, and it was dull, and it was boring, and it was repetitive, and it was... But it was a means. It was a means to the Friday night.
You used to just have fun. You heard rock and roll music in the street. If somebody was playing it, you stood there and jived. You didn't care who was watching.
I think if you spoke to anybody from Radford at my age, they'll all say the same thing. The storyline was exactly as we lived it, or wanted to live it.
You lived for the weekend. You lived for Friday and Saturday, and you blew everything.
The rowdy gang of singers who sat at the scattered tables saw Arthur walk unsteadily to the head of the stairs. And though they must have known that he was dead drunk and seen the danger he would soon be in, no one attempted to talk to him and lead him back to his seat.
From the early morning to the early night, when the comes Molly rocking at the house of blue light, good golly, Miss Molly.
Oh, you drank to excess. You just absolutely drunk to excess.
With 11 pints of beer and 7 small gins playing hide and seek inside his stomach, he fell from the topmost stair to the bottom.
If they wanted the pub, they was in the bookies.
There were lots of Arthur Seatons.
Piled up passions were exploded on Saturday night, and the effect of a week's monotonous graft in the factory was swilled out of your system in a burst of goodwill.
If you were at it, so to speak, and you were found out, you couldn't sort of separate, oh, that's it then, we're separated now, I'm going to live somewhere else. There was nowhere to go, particularly the lady of the house. If she'd been at it and got caught, then she had to live with the consequences, and there were quite a few fat lips, weren't there?
If you go back to the reviews and the responses of the critics at the time, they were absolutely knocked out by the veracity and the authenticity of it, where a lot of the writing at that time was kind of almost semi-detached from the environment and the social context. Alan was absolutely true to his word. And I think that made it not autobiographical, but, like I say, authentic. That was its power.
Saturday night and Sunday morning, it actually gave us an identity because it went national.
It made us feel as though we was important people to have lived round there. That's how it made us feel.
The book remains powerful and resonated with the next generation of readers.
There was a scene on the estate where my grandma lived, and all of these places that I knew, and I couldn't believe that someone had written a book and put these places that I knew in a book, and it just changed my whole view of what literature was. Arthur Seaton's really interesting because he's not exactly a socialist, but he's kind of anti-everything. He's like, you know, whoever you are, you're after, you know, kind of doing me down, and I'm not going to be defined by you. So he kind of he isn't into the union, but he hates the bosses.
Me? All I'm out for is a good time. All the rest is propaganda.
Arthur Seaton is the kind of person that my grandma, mama as we say here, would have said, got the cheek of the devil.
Nikki met her hero and even got to know him a little before he died in 2010. She says he remained a defiant character.
He was a man of quiet rebellion, but I think it was there, definitely part of who he was.
Once a rebel, always a rebel.
I was at school here at Oldham and White when I first read our next book, and it made a real impression. I was a little bit older than our hero. He was 13 3/4, but The Secret Diary of Adrian by Sue Townsend really struck a chord. It was funny, it was smart, and it was subversive.
I've realised I've never seen a dead body or a real female nipple. This is what comes of living in a cul-de-sac.
A classic line there from Adrian, which is of course set here in Leicester. I'm on Atley Way, just outside the Pork Pie Library, about to meet local writer Bally Ray. It's a library Sue Townsend knew and loved. Choosing to voice her opinions and her thoughts through the eyes of Adrian, a kind of narcissistic teenager, that was pretty clever, I think.
It's wonderful because you can say stuff that you want to say and maybe touch on things that aren't quite your viewpoints in a really, really easy way, in a really clever way. But also, teenagers are so earnest about the world because everything that they feel. When I fell in love for the first time as a teenager, nobody had been in love like that before, and Adrian Mole certainly does that with Pandora, and everything else, his feelings about the BBC, about politics, it's all very earnest and very real, and he feels it deeply.
Bally was aged around 10 3/4 when he first read Secret Diary, and it's fair to say it had a massive impact.
The book for me was huge. It was the first time I ever considered that I could possibly become an author. I'd always wanted to be one, dreamt of it because of the likes of Roald Dahl, C.S. Lewis, etc., but they were untouchable. Sue Townsend was a woman that lived in my city whose kids, they had reputations from my school and others. They were people who were everyday, and she was writing about the neighbours.
There were even Asian characters in the book, something quite extraordinary at that time.
At the end of the tea, Mr. Singh made a speech about how great it was to be British. Everyone cheered and sang Land of Hope and Glory. But only Mr. Singh knew all of the words.
Leicester is the most multiracial city in the UK, so the idea that there was a Mr. Singh character, especially for me from a Sikh background, was a massive connecting factor, but also the idea that in the clip he's the only person in that room that knows all the words to Land of Hope and Glory. There were no other faces like Mr. Singh in books that I was reading. He was, again, a revelation. It was like seeing a member of my own family in the book.
Today, Bally is fulfilling a lifelong ambition. He's come to the University of Leicester Library Special Collections Department. Here they look after the entire Sue Townsend archive.
So this is the original manuscript of the Secret Diary of Adrian Mole.
So this is, it's just stunning. It's stunning to be able to see this.
For this book, there's just one draft manuscript, and this is it.
It's astonishing.
It is. For us, it's kind of like our Magna Carta or our Shakespeare's First Folio. So there it is, and there's a couple of things that you might immediately notice on that front page that are a bit unusual.
Well, he's called Nigel Mole, and he's 14 3/4.
He is indeed,
Straight
yes.
away, that's the... wow. It's kind of hard to describe, because when I was 11, 12, I used to sit reading the books a little bit older, and I used to wonder how Sue wrote. You know, what did it look like? What did she actually do? And now I get to see it, and I've just been smiling since I saw it.
So the name was changed on the advice of the BBC and Sue's publisher, Methuen, because to avoid comparisons with Nigel Molesworth, who was another fictional schoolboy.
It's a real snapshot of a particular point in time, and again, this idea that you're almost hovering over her shoulder, and I can almost imagine her sitting there doing this, maybe listening to the radio or telling the kids to be quiet or whatever. It's it's an astonishing feeling to just see it.
But then if we go on through the manuscript, it starts to get a little bit scrappier, and this is very typical of how she wrote during this part of her career, in these block capital letters, lots of crossings out, insertions, revisions.
Lots of little notes and, lots of revisions.
This man, Sue Townsend's husband, was actually in the kitchen trying to read that scratchy handwritten manuscript and prepare it for the publisher.
She couldn't type, so I had to type it. I can't type either, but I can type with one hand. It was done on a really old typewriter, not a computer, and every time you made a mistake, you had to tip exit out. God, that was a slow process, wasn't it? But I read it for the first time as the whole book as I was typing it. Neither Sue nor I thought it would be big, but the publisher was quite happy with it. And it just exploded.
It became a huge bestseller all over the world, translated into 30 different languages.
Like a little piece of art.
The book also spawned a radio show, a TV series, and even, most recently, a musical.
You could put it on your show. After a piece on violent dogs, it will slow. Everyone will know the tap. It will put me on the map. What a piece of poetry. Seriously, his words, they...
The vanity and self-obsession of Adrian was a gift for illustrator Caroline Holden.
One of the things I thought of initially was to have a mirror where the writing was done in the steam. So I think I stood in the flat where I was living, steaming up the window and writing on it. I never wanted to draw Adrian, because I had him in my head. And I know with books, when you're reading them, and it's a character that's quite strong, I don't necessarily want to have that person drawn.
My skin's dead good. I think it must be a combination of being in love and Lucozade.
It was a dream job to have, really. I mean, it was just so full of fun, laughter, and but also very serious issues as well. It was a lovely job to have.
Sue Townsend once said, "No amount of balsamic vinegar or Prada handbags will make me forget what it was like to be poor." And while The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole is achingly funny, it's also intensely political.
On the fence, waiting to see which way this battle's going to go.
It's very political. Sue was a socialist, and she makes that point loads of times. She didn't like Margaret Thatcher. None of us did.
I'm not sure how I'll vote. Sometimes I think Mrs. Thatcher is a nice, kind sort of woman. Then the next day, I see her on television, and she frightens me rigid. She's got eyes like a psychotic killer, but a voice like a gentle person. It is a bit confusing.
She was able to make very, very sharp commentary and observations about British society under Thatcher during the 1980s, but in a warm-hearted and humorous way. And I think that the readership really connected to that.
Get up, you knees, start fighting, come on, let's all get together.
When she passed away, I think a lot of the coverage and certainly a lot of the articles about her they glossed over the fact that she was a rebel. And I love that about her.
My name up in lights, what an intellectual man. I'll be.
It will endure forever, absolutely. I can't imagine it not.
Yours faithfully, Adrian Albert Mole.
It's a classic, isn't it? It's a modern classic now. I think that's the way people see it.
What's the book you'd recommend? Share your suggestion using the hashtag #LoveToRead and see what other books people have been talking about. Set here in North Nottinghamshire, our final book, Sons and Lovers, takes us back 100 years, but it's still as fresh, vibrant and relevant today. It's a true literary classic. Sons and Lovers was written by D.H. Lawrence, the son of a miner, born in a back-to-back terrace house just over there in Eastwood. Said to be his most autobiographical work, it describes life down the pits, a mother's love for her son, and a quest to rise above working-class roots.
On Sunday mornings, he would get up and prepare breakfast. The fire was never let to go out. He toasted his bacon on a fork and caught the drops of fat on his bread. Then he put the rasher on his thick slice of bread and cut off chunks with a clasp knife, poured his tea into his saucer and was happy.
Sons and Lovers is that rare thing. It's a working class novel written by somebody who grew up working class. It's full of authentic detail about the way of life in this community. It reproduces speech patterns, it reproduces habits and routines of life. So it's very authentic in that sense.
There were 7 in the Lawrence family, and David Herbert Lawrence was born in the back streets of Eastwood, in a miner's cottage, now a museum.
The kitchen is a very it's a small place. It's a place where the family gathered because it was the warmest place in the house. It always had the fire going. And often there's a feeling of claustrophobia in the way that Lawrence uses the kitchen. And a lot of the things that happen in Sons and Lovers happen in the kitchen, particularly the arguments in the kitchen, the blazing rows.
A fine mess.
Just think I want to see you with my arms dangling because I've got a parcel to deal with, eh? Oh, Winnie! Come on, Winnie!
Just like in Sons and Lovers, the Lawrence home was cramped, noisy and lacked privacy.
We think that they shared those facilities with 3 or 4 families who lived along the same row. There's no garden, it's just a shared yard which was probably beaten earth, and there'd be children out there playing. It'd be smelly, dirty, as I say, very busy, no privacy whatsoever.
But the deprivations at home were nothing compared to the brutal life underground. Sons and Lovers was published in 1913, and for the first time, middle-class readers discovered just how hard and backbreaking the life of the miner was.
Mining and pit life is the framework of the whole novel because it depicts that industrial, close-knit community, very hard living in that. You don't know where the next penny's coming from.
Just like in the novel, Lawrence's father was a butty, a sort of self-employed foreman.
Now, while the world stands, this rock blocks my way for tomorrow, and I mean to have it out.
Happen that catch me up. What he does, he's a middleman between the coal company and the men. He actually employs teams of colliers and hewers to get the coal out, and he takes his cut.
What I've always loved about the novel is just how graphically realistic, how intimate the portrayals of working class life and the life of the mining community are in it. I think that's the thing that strikes anybody who reads the novel. It commemorates working class life, and it presents working class life for a middle class readership.
The sun was going down. Every open evening, the hills of Derbyshire were blazed over with red sunset. Mrs. Morell watched the sun sink from the glistening sky, leaving a soft flower blue overhead, while the western space went red, as if all the fire had swum down there.
There's a real feeling not only for the gritty reality of working life, but also of the beautiful surrounding countryside around here, of the way that the agricultural world was so close to the industrial world, of how one could escape from this world into another world beyond.
The Lawrence family escaped by moving up the housing ladder within Eastwood. Something else reflected in Sons and Lovers, with homes like this.
It's called The Bottoms in the opening to Sons and Lovers. It's an end terrace with a plot of garden at the side of it, and it's a sign that the Lawrence family was moving up in the world.
Lawrence, of course, would eventually leave Eastwood for good. He travelled and lived all over the world and died in France. For quite a while, Eastwood resented the way their town had been depicted in Sons and Lovers, and Lawrence retaliated by saying that he hated the damn place. But these days, Eastwood relishes and even raises a glass to D.H. Lawrence.
Yes, here you can get yourself a pint of Mellors named after the lusty gamekeeper in Lady Chatterley's Lover. But I'm not just here for a drink, I'm also here to learn about the language of Lawrence. Around here you'll hear lots of Appens, outs, nouts and nays, just like in Lawrence's work. But what about the more obscure phrases, like scrating? Did you know that that meant to weep uncontrollably, or slide, to creep up behind somebody stealthily? Or perhaps my favourite, clat fart. Not what you think. In fact, it just means gossip.
Dunna V. Tell me it's his and mother. Dunna V. Dunna V.
Oh, he'll be coming to tell me his sen wench wanna he.
I doesn't mean to say to me mother. He's gone with that.
My gal, oh to do for a man in the dark that's got it flapped.
Drama students at the town's Hall Park Academy have been discovering their own personal connections with the language of Lawrence.
Were there any specific words that you relate to, that you actually say and that you actually use in your own everyday language?
Oat.
Okay, what do we use oat for? What does it mean?
Say it instead of like anything, so say if like somebody offers you food, you'd say, oh no, I don't want oat.
Yeah, brilliant. And we actually say that all the time. It's very much... The language is so rich. It's very much how they speak now, even if the students won't admit that. They will say, oh, no, I don't really understand it. I don't really talk like that. But then once they start actually reading it and looking deeper into it, they realise that that is actually how they speak. They use a lot of the language, a lot of the words.
I expect you know I am, Mrs. Needle. Here you are. Yeah, you're Lizzie Steen, right? You might have what I've come for. Up and right. Up and right.
You have to pick up all the old phrases, and it's very hard.
My mum grew up in Eastwood, so she shortens words a lot at the time.
I expect you know who I am.
And these students share something else with Lawrence and Sons and Lovers, a burning desire to leave Eastwood.
Up and right.
When I'm older, I want to act, so I want to get somewhere where it's easier for me to pursue my dreams.
There's not a lot here to do, so maybe you'll move out the area and explore the country or the world, or go to university or something like that.
I've been doing a lot with the lad.
I think Sons and Lovers recreates, it reproduces a very intimate glimpse of a world that's now lost to us.
Now this is the really tricky bit. I need to decide which of the 3 brilliant books that we've featured in the programme is my favourite. My head is spinning.
Alice should pick Saturday Night and Sunday Morning because it encapsulates almost a moment in British history.
Well, I think Sons and Lovers should be picked because it's a wonderful story.
Alice should pick The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole because it essentially was a revolution.
So plenty of advice there, but in the end, I have to make the decision. So what is it going to be? Saturday Night and Sunday Morning? Arthur Seton, I think we've all met one. Sons and Lovers, perhaps. I mean, it's still taught in schools today. And let's not forget Adrian Mole. Reading that again, I realised how much I'd missed the first time round. But I can only pick one. It's got to be Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. In Arthur Seton, Alan Sillitoe's created a character that still feels completely relevant even today. He's fighting against authority, he's pushing against older generations, he doesn't want to give up on that hedonistic lifestyle. And in 2016, that is definitely something I recognise. So this is my favourite, but what is yours? From me and Books That Made Britain, goodbye.